Greetings, fellow humans, and welcome to the Renaissance Yorkshireman podcast. The World Economic Forum finished last week, but I would like to make one final video that, while not directly about the World Economic Forum, is really about the psychology of economists, of whom many of the people who work for the World Economic Forum are economists, and why the psychology of these economists is absolutely delusional, and how most of them are really quite incredibly egotistical. And although the theories that they come up with are not based on evidence and often don't predict, in fact, what is going to happen or what has happened, they still kind of delude themselves that they're actually some kind of intellectual and that they are in fact scientists and what they're doing has some kind of value for the world. It doesn't. They are living in denial. And to support what I'm saying, I'm going to quote a little bit from chapter 5 of Kate Rawath's book, Donut Economics, and chapter 5 is called Design to Distribute. And I'm also going to quote a little bit from Gary Stevenson's website. Gary Stevenson is a maths and economics graduate from the London School of Economics, and at the age of 25 in 2011, he was the most profitable trader on the planet. So he's an industry insider. He was a stock trader, a financial trader. So he knows about the financial industry from the inside. And since about 2015, he's been talking and writing about inequality, which he believes is a very big deal, in contrast to most economists who just completely ignore it. And finally, I'd just like to mention a little bit about the Post-Crash Economics Society from Manchester University. And in 2012-2013, they thought that the syllabus that they were being taught by their lecturers at Manchester University in economics should be changed in light of the 2008 financial crisis. Fairly reasonable, you might think, but not according to their lecturers, who just basically carried on as if nothing had happened. On page 166 of her superlative work, Donut Economics, which I really cannot recommend enough, Rawath says this: contrary to Pareto's static social pyramid, Kuznet believed he had uncovered a different law. A social roller coaster ride on which inequality first rose, then levelled off, then eventually fell again, all while the economy grew. In the early stages of economic development, Kuznet suggests, as workers are drawn into cities, they leave behind low-paid but fairly egalitarian rural life to earn higher but more unequal urban wages. And so inequality increases as industrialisation gets underway. At a certain point, however, once enough workers are earning those higher urban wages and they start demanding better pay for the low-waged among them, inequality begins to fall again, resulting in a both more prosperous and more equal society. It was a clever theory, but it was wrong, not least because rural incomes were in fact far from egalitarian, a false assumption for which Kuznet privately admitted he had, quote, no evidence whatsoever. But to his credit, he was cautious when publishing his conjectures, noting that the, quote, scant data he drawn were specific to a particular historical context and should not be used for making, quote, unwarranted dogmatic generalizations. He openly admitted that his explanations came, quote, perilously close to pure guesswork, thus making his conclusions, and again I'm quoting, 5% empirical information and 95% pure speculation, some of it possibly tainted by wishful thinking. So much for the warnings, because the Kuznet curve, which looks like this. So at the beginning, inequality rises, then it kind of levels off, then it falls again. this was used as evidence for mainstream economics. Rawaf says, the image that Kuznet had already sketched in every economist's mind was soon drawn onto the Economist page and named the Kuznets curve. The inverted U rapidly became an iconic economic diagram, especially in the nascent field of development economics. In the blunt words of the field's founding theorist, W. Arthur Lewis, development must be inegalitarian. In the 1970s, both Kuznets and Lewis won the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economics for their respective theories in growth and inequality, while the World Bank treated the curve as an economic law and used it to publish projections of how long it would take for the poverty levels to start falling in low and middle income countries. Economists, meanwhile, kept searching for real-world examples for this roller coaster rise. Blah, 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 blah. As a leading economist of the day in the 1990s put it, the pattern is that there is no pattern. So here's the thing. Economists have an idea, then they look for evidence to support it, and then it's a law. It's a natural law. What economists are really saying is that the Kuznets curve is some kind of law, in the same way that, like, pi r squared is the area of a circle is a natural law. It isn't. It's a projection based on a very small amount of evidence that is wrong. And yet it's still in the economics textbook and it is still being taught at university despite the evidence that it's absolute pure fantasy. So Gary Stevenson, who I mentioned earlier, in 2015 he wrote, 7 years after the dramatic explosions of the 2008 financial crisis, we still live in an economically depressed world. Jobs are difficult to find and low paid in much of the world. Young unemployed people the world over feel that they must move to a handful of huge crowded and growing super cities in order to find work. I'll just make a small comment about my own experience here. I lived in Bangkok for about 5 years altogether. I lived in Mexico City for about 6 months. And although I've never lived in London, if I added up all the time I've spent there, it would be at least 6 months. So I've spent a good 6 years of my life in megacities, and I will make a video in the future about megacities. But my point is this: humans did not evolve to live in megacities. There are so many problems with megacities, but it fits into the capitalist narrative that this is the only way forward. There is only one path to development. Build bigger cities. Growth, growth, growth. Doesn't matter about whether there's inequality. We just need higher GDP. Absolute fantasists and bullshitters. They should have gone and had some lectures with J.K. Rowling and gone off and written fantasy work. It would have saved us from the nonsense of their alleged dismal science. Stevenson says on his website, in the meantime, financial markets containing most of the well-paid and well-educated young economists of our time continue to hopelessly fail to forecast the situation. This is the thing about economists. They make forecasts and the vast majority of them are wrong. And yet they somehow continue to take themselves seriously. It's like, if they were real scientists, what they say would have been thrown out years ago. Stevenson also says, how can it be that a financial crisis seated within the banking sector can still be affecting our economy 7 years after its onset? He wrote this in 2015, so it's actually now 12 years. How can it be that the most well-paid and well-educated economists in our society can have incorrectly predicted the path of interest rates and the recovery for 6 consecutive years? How can it be that after 6 years of falsely predicting interest rate rises, they continue to make the same predictions completely unfazed? How can it be? I'll tell you how. It's because of their dysfunctional psychology, where essentially they are egomaniacs. They think they're shit hot, when actually everything they're predicting is poor at best. But these people, they're being paid a lot of money, so they don't understand about poverty and the impacts of poverty because they're not poor. They are rich, they live in ivory towers, they like to go on these jaunts to places like Davos where they have an expenses account because the system serves them and the class that they belong to. But it doesn't serve more than 90% of the planet's human population. And it doesn't serve the planet. Finally, I'd like to mention a little bit about the post-crash economic society from Manchester. So after the economic crisis of 2007-2008, a group of economists and lecturers got together to decide if what they were teaching was equipping the economists of the future with the right tools. They came to the conclusion that it probably wasn't, but they didn't change the curriculum. Some of the students at Manchester University went on strike because they thought that they weren't being taught the right things. And they were correct to believe that. And really, the teaching of economics in universities has barely changed since 2008. It's like, for economists, this crisis didn't happen. They just ignore it. It's the elephant in the room that they just keep ignoring. Not the only elephant, because they don't talk about the problems with the five capitals framework. They don't talk about debt-based currencies and alternatives to debt-based currencies. They're not talking about the arms trade. They're not talking about psychopathy within the political system. I mean, these people live on another planet. I've said it a number of times in my last few videos. These people are utter fantasists, and yet they are stewarding our economic system. It would be laughably funny if it didn't have such serious implications for people all over the world, myself included. In conclusion, I will say this: we need a new economic system. Capitalism is failing. It's failing because it makes assumptions which it bases models on, and the assumptions are wrong. And this would be true in any other discipline. But economists delude themselves that they are scientists. They're not. We need new post-capitalist systems and game B alternatives to the current game A of mainstream capitalist economics. Thank you for giving me your time today. Peace.